All right, we are live on another edition of the Edlow podcast. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. I always say it 3 times, hoping that someone new will subscribe. And here we are. Everybody who's been listening and following this for 130 whatever episodes knows I'm a big time pro wrestling guy. Done it. Just took my kids to WrestleMania weekend, and I was lucky enough at an ECW reunion show to run into one of my favorites, the Blue Meanie, and I said, I got to have you on my podcast. And he said, absolutely. And then just boom, it happens. And so we're here, and I appreciate you coming on. And you just got married.
Yes, sir. We had a little bit of a surprise wedding. We didn't tell anybody we were doing it, and they found out when we did it.
Nice. Well, congratulations on that. And congratulations on, I think, I hope you don't take offense to me saying this, but you don't look like the typical pro wrestler, at least especially from the 90s, right? And so what has always impressed me about you is, despite I think it's relaxed a little bit now, but in the 90s, I mean, you had to be like 6'5", 265 if you were going to make it. And you were able to make it not looking like that. And what do you think it was about you that appealed to so many?
I think if I did look like a lot of the other wrestlers, I just would have blended in and faded away. I think it was just the fact that I had a different look. And, thankfully, Raven saw something in me. He saw me on an independent show. There was like a series of 3 shows Raven saw me on, and he got an idea for me to be a part of his faction. And it was because the way I looked. I was, like a Chris Farley type, just, over the top kind of comedic type wrestler, and, trying to find my way. And Stevie was his, lackey, and he wanted to have, an overweight dude to be his lackey, and, wear the half shirt and Daisy Dukes. And I think if I had been this jacked guy, 6'5", I don't think it would have got me any notice for what would become my ECW career, and then later on my WWE career.
So how long at that point, when you were discovered, had you been wrestling?
I was only in the business a year and a half.
Wow.
This is my 30th year. I started training in March of '94, and I had my first match June of '94 in Wallaceburg, Ontario, Canada. And not much longer after that, Al gave me the speech of how it was time to go home and learn how to hustle and learn how to get my own bookings. Because at that point, I was wrestling a lot, but Al was getting me the bookings, whether it was with Sabu or Dan Severin. And I was doing every Thursday in Indianapolis, Indiana, for a guy named Mike Sample. So I was wrestling a lot, but they were kind of just, bookings were just given to me by Al. So he said, go home, start hustling on the indies and learn to make your way. And that's what I did. I moved back home. I started showing up at the shows in Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia. And then that led to me getting noticed by ECW.
Yeah. Wow. So now that time, I being around the wrestling business, I know that going from training in March to your first match in June, that's even quick. I mean, were you a quick learner when it came to the training?
Well, my first match wasn't anything to write home about. It was just, it sucked. But, training, I was starting to have, training, matches in class. And a fellow student who wrestled as the Lumberjack was having a show in his hometown and wanted to have me on the show. And Al said, I was ready enough to have like, a beginner's type match. And thank God I wrestled a guy named Geza Coleman, who had been wrestling for a while by then. And he led me through a decent match. Again, nothing to write home about, but it was a start. And then, well, I also benefited that I lived in the school. I moved to Ohio, and I would have, what they would call in football two-a-days, where there would be a morning session and a night session, and then I would train for the morning class, and then do whatever I had to do during the afternoon, and then he'd come back at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and we'd have an evening class. And I was doing two-a-days 5 days a week for a year. And the only time we didn't do those is like if Al had a booking and we had to go out of town, which I considered a class trip, and I'd go watch Al work, and he would incorporate something into his match that he had taught me during the week to see if I could pick up on it. And I learned more on car rides than anything. I mean, you could teach anybody to do holds and do moves. It's the why, the when, the whys, and the hows, or the hows, the whys, and the whens, whatever is what makes a good match. And I learned more about that than on the car rides with Al, to the event and post event. And we would just talk about his match, and he would, hey, be like, hey, did you see that thing? Blah blah blah. I was like, oh yeah, and and we would just talk. So, I was fortunate to have Al as a trainer, and that could have added to how quick I picked up on things.
Yeah. And also some people, I've like I said, I've been around for a long time, and I've seen a lot of guys come and go. I owned a wrestling gym, a training gym for a while, and I trained with, Johnny Jeter and a guy named Oliver John and different people. And so I've seen a lot of guys come and go, and there's some people who just get it. There's some people who get it and some people who don't. I used to tell people who would open up wrestling schools, I'd be like 1 in 10. I was like, every 10 people who walk through the door, one will finish your training. So
Yeah.
just don't be upset when half the people are gone day one, and and then a month later, some people don't have the dues. You know what I mean? and then next thing you know, you
Yeah.
got one left. And so it sounds like you were probably one of those guys, though, who you were passionate enough about it and getting it fast enough that Al would take you under his wing.
Yeah. It was, I was prepared to go just because, I knew I wanted to do it, and I was going to go to another school initially in Florida, the Malenko Brothers School, but just the cost of living down there was more than what I could afford, because I worked, after I graduated high school, I worked in a casino, and I knew I had to save money for tuition. Half my check would go to the house, and the other half would go towards tuition. And then once I had my tuition I started saving up money for living expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So, just so I can just concentrate on paying tuition and having something to eat in between classes. And, but when I got there, my tuition was already paid. All I had to worry about was training and, learning. And, I think just the fact that, I kind of say I was kind of like Jim Carrey in The Cable Guy, the kid who grew up on wrestling. Like his character was obsessed with television. I was obsessed with wrestling, and I watched it every week. And, I read all the interviews, and I graduated to the dirt sheets where I'm reading shoot interviews, and, just reading what, the pros would talk about and say. And it's kind of like an early sneak peek into what I was getting into. And there was an interview with Ted DiBiase where he's like, hey man, you gotta, not everybody's going to make it. You need to have a backup plan and all stuff. And, when I was in high school, I took up a trade just in case, graphic arts, which is something I still benefit from to this day, because I'll design my own t-shirts and stuff like that. But if you're going to go into professional wrestling, you need to just be prepared. Just have your ducks, have all your ducks lined up in a row, and be prepared that this is going to be the only thing you're going to have to focus on, and this is the only thing you need to do. And I was willing to do that, working that whole year and just not having much of a social life, between working, saving, and then preparing myself to go to wrestling school. So when I got there, I was mentally ready. And then when I was there, maybe 2 months into my training, I got a call from my grandmom saying my grandfather was, was dying from cancer. And that lit another fire. And I already wanted to be a professional wrestler, but now I knew I had to do it, because if I was going to spend this year away from my grandfather while he was, he had asbestosis. And I knew if I'm going to be away from him for a year, I can't waste this time. And I knew I had to put all my energy into learning and evolving as a professional wrestler. And then, he had passed while I was, away. And then when I came back home, and, the family, my grandparents, helped my mom raise me. And their dream was to live in Atlantic City, retire there. And when he passed, she was like, you know what? This was our dream. Let's go back to Philly. And as soon as I moved back to Philly, ECW was, the ECW opportunity came up, and it's just about opportunities and timing and instincts. And I don't know what it was, but there's certain things and certain times where I just like, okay, I'm going to do this now. And it just happened to work out,
Yeah. Well, now let me ask you something about that, because I find this really interesting. I talk to a lot of people who've been very successful, and one of the things that I find so interesting about what you just said was you just had it in your mind you were going to be a pro wrestler, and it doesn't strike me as an idea that like you ever really thought you were going to necessarily fail, right? Or
Yeah.
at least didn't care, right? So tell me about your mindset going through this. I mean, because I find that so interesting. I find that most people, like, there's something about, like, I've been talking about this recently a lot. I learned about this thing called the expectation effect. Have you ever heard of that?
No, but go on.
Okay, let me explain. Yeah. So
Please.
there was a study that they did on rats, and they took these rats together and they split them up into two groups. And nothing special about any of the rats, but then they brought these test subjects in, and they told half of the people who were doing these certain half of rats, they said, now these rats were specifically designed, bred, and trained to do the maze. They should do the maze faster. And those rats, even though they were completely the same as the other rats, moved through the maze twice as fast as the other rats. Meaning there's something about expectation that affects performance. And somehow it seems to me that you expected to be a pro wrestler, and yet things somehow worked out.
Yeah.
So tell me about your mindset as you're going through all this.
It was an obsession,
Yeah.
as a kid, especially growing up as a kid. I was a severe asthmatic. And then when I tell my family I want to be a professional wrestler, I may as well said I want to be an astronaut. It just to them, they're like, okay, you're going to be, that's cute. How's that work? Where do you go? And, again, I was obsessed with the business. I watched every week. I went from watching as a fan to kind of picking up on things like timing wise, like calling out the spots, calling out the moves, before they did them, kind of thing.
Right.
And then, start reading the newsletters and reading interviews and getting into that mindset, and see where, try to understand where, these, people in the business were coming from. So, and then I had to try out the Monster Factory, and then that went well. But, I knew I had to get away from home if I wanted to truly be, if I want to go at this, because I knew as soon as I walked home and I'm covered with bumps and bruises, my family would try to talk me out of it. But just the mindset was, this is what I'm doing. I'm truly a believer of visualization. If you can physically, or if you can visualize yourself doing something, it makes it that much easier than when you go to try and do it. I visualize myself as a wrestler every week. So, something as simple as when we lived in Atlantic City and we go visit my family in Philadelphia, we'd get on the New Jersey transit bus, and I would pretend I'm going on the road for a wrestling trip. Just little
Yeah.
things. It's like, okay, I'm going on the road now. Just it sounds goofy, but just if you can visualize yourself doing it and believe that you can do it, I believe you can do it. It's just once you take that initial bump, you're like, "Ooh, do I want to do this?" And
Yeah, I remember. I remember the first time I was body slammed, and that is not a trampoline.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, my,
it's rough.
yeah. My first tryout was with the Monster Factory, and Headbanger Thrasher put me through my tryout, and I picked up on it, and it hurt. But then and when I went to train with Alan, I went to take my first set of bumps, and I kept like jamming my heels into the mat, and it was hurt my shins and all. And there's a moment where I just rolled out of the ring, walked into the living quarters, and just sat there and stared at the wall. And thank God Al came in, gave me a few moments, came in, sat next to me. He's like, "All right, what's wrong?" I was like, I told him. He's like, "All right, well," and he talked me through it, and we went in, and I just kept doing it. And thankfully for him, he wasn't one of those guys where, okay, now you got it. Now you got to move on to the next thing. He was just like, you're going to perfect this thing before you go into anything else. But you're talking about mindset. It was just, this is all I knew. This is all I wanted to do, and I visualized myself doing it. And when I was working in the casinos, and I already sent in my tuition, to the school, and it got to the point where I was like, all right, I got what am I doing? I'm stalling. I'm waiting. It's enough stalling. And me and my mom were walking down to catch the bus to go to work, and I we're standing at a red light. I went, you know what? Tonight I'm going in. I'm giving my 2 weeks notice. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. She went, okay. And I went to work that night. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and then the day after WrestleMania 10, I loaded up the car and drove out to Ohio, and it was just the right time,
Yeah.
just the right time
Yeah.
for everything.
Tell me now also, while we're on this topic, where I'm at, and I'm sure it's the same out where you're at. There are so many wrestling schools you can go to.
Mhm.
I mean, there's just a ton, and most of them are, a guy who was trained by a guy who was trained by a guy who was trained by a guy who trained at the Heart Dungeon. It was like something like that. Whereas, talk to me about why specifically you chose all the wrestling schools that you're talking about are reputable wrestling schools. Why was it so important for you to find these ones, even if they were in town or out of town, that had names to train?
Well, living in Jersey, at that time, the Monster Factory was and still is one of the prominent wrestling schools in the country, in the world. And I tried out there, and out of maybe 10, 12 people, me and like 3 other guys got called into the office to talk about joining. And it was tempting. It just, he gave us the tuition. I knew I wanted to finish high school. I was like a sophomore at the time. I was like, I'm definitely finishing high school. But it gave me time to think and reflect. And, growing up, severe asthmatic, I was always taught, I always be coerced out of doing things that, might, be physically, just because, my grandparents worried about me with my asthma. I was like, you know what? I gotta do something. I gotta go somewhere. And when I saw the Malenko brothers wrestled the British Bulldogs in All Japan, I was like, oh, dude, these Malenkos are awesome. I want to train there. And I found out they had a school. Start corresponding with a woman named Phyllis Lee, and she was like a den mother to a lot of the wrestlers. Besides me, she helped, X-Pac and Rave, and she helped she helped Dan Severn get into his first UFC. And we were talking about going to Malenko's, and I, told her, I started, flinching about the price to live down there. And she said, well, there's an alternative. Have you ever heard of Al Snow? And at the time, Al was just, he had been in the business about 11 years at that point, and he was just having this feud with Sabu that was really picking up steam and getting a lot of coverage. I was like, "Yeah, I heard of him," and she recommended Al as an alternative, and I was like, "Well, if this woman, just on a reputation alone, is recommending Al Snow, he's got to be the place to be, right?" And that's when I started, going to, start preparing to move to Ohio instead of going to Florida. And in the morning after WrestleMania 10, I made the 13-hour journey from Atlantic City to Lima, and it was one of the biggest risks of my life, but it was the most rewarding risk of my life
Yeah.
because Al turned out to be one of the best trainers ever, and
Yeah. He's actually been on the podcast, and he's just, you can just tell he's special, you know?
oh yeah, he was like a big, he's I still call him my big brother. He is my big brother. And
Mhm.
just look at the litany of people, the list of people he's trained,
Mhm.
at the who's who. And I was, lucky to be one of those early students to train with him. But
Yeah.
it's it's just about feel. I'm making it sound like it was just a matter of, okay, this is what I'm going to do now, but it literally was moments in my life where I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that was it. And I don't know if I would have chose a day earlier or later, things may have gone a different way, with the sliding doors effect,
Mhm.
but it it just happened to, thank God it worked out for me, that way.
Yeah. Now, going backwards, you mentioned your grandparents raised you along with your mom, and I got to tell you, I relate with that. I was so close with my maternal grandparents. They were just like, they were basically extra parents. I would stay the night at their house and do all this stuff. They were always around.
Yeah.
And so tell me about growing up uh, with your grandparents and your mother. I don't know, was your father around as well, or?
I never knew him.
Oh, okay. All right. And so tell me what that was like for you growing up, and how wrestling kind of played into that.
Oh, it just, my mom was a single mom raising me and my sister, and, she was doing all she could. She had, between working, and then she would try to go to dental school to become a dental assistant, and just trying, seeing what, would stick, to help her provide for her kids. And, it was hard because, as a kid, growing up, every 2 weeks, from when I was a baby until maybe sixth or seventh grade, I would spend 2 weeks in the hospital every spring and every fall, with change of seasons. My asthma was induced. So, when the seasons are changing and there's a lot of pollen in the air, I couldn't breathe. And that became sort of like, it became a hardship for my mom to try to work and, take her son to the hospital. And so my grandparents were like, look, you, and my sister is 8 years older than me. So she was, able to take care of herself a little bit better than I was at the time. So my grandparents were like, look, we'll take care of Brian. Uh, and you do what you got to do. And, they moved to Atlantic City, to retire. And I got, they took, was it, not custody, guardianship. They got guardianship
Mm,
of me, and we moved to Atlantic City, and they raised me like a kid and their own kid. And,
mhm,
I'm very fortunate because while they were supposed to be enjoying retirement, they were helping me, raise me. They put me through Catholic school. They put clothes on me. They put me through, they put food on my table. And then, when the bug bit me for professional wrestling, they supported my wrestling habit of going to shows and, buying the magazines, buying the VHS tapes, and, you know, uh, we bonded. I love my mom. I love my grandparents. I was fortunate to have like three parents, growing up because you know, growing up, you know, you almost feel that guilt that you feel like you took away from, you know, their lives to, you know, because I was always sick or, you know, stuff like that. And then, you know, growing up asthmatic and, you know, overweight and dealing with that, and you deal with depression and, you know, you still, you know, then you deal with bullies and all this other stuff. And, they were always there for me, you know, whether it was,
Yeah.
you know, going to the hospital or, you know, there's times where I had to go to therapy and stuff like that, you know, to deal with depression of, you know, not being able to play in the other kids' reindeer games and stuff like that, and just different
Mhm.
things. So, yeah, there's a special bond that, you know, to this day, any chance I get a chance to, you know, sing their praises, you know, my mom and my grandparents, I'll do that because I don't know where I would be without them. And it was to the point where, you know, I was in ECW and I was wrestling and I was making money, but I wasn't making that much. You know,
Mhm.
thankfully, you know, Bam Bam Bigelow took me aside one day. He's like, "Hey, how much you making?" I told him. He's like, "Go to Paul and ask for this amount." And I did, and I started making a little bit more money, and I was actually able to contribute to the household as a professional wrestler. And I get the call for WWE, and you know, Bruce Pritchard's like, "All right, be at the building Sunday at 11 a.m." I was like, "All right," and I walked 20 feet in the living room. I told my mom and my grandmom, you know, put all the bills in my name, and they're like, "Why?" I was like, I'm going to the WWF." And, you know, my grandmom, you know, her knees buckled and my mom was like, "Oh, yeah, just," and from that point on, I took over and was able to repay the debt that, you know, they invested in me. Because a lot of wrestlers goes, "Oh, well, I paid my dues." And, you know, we do, but, you know, a lot of times the families, you know, supporting the wrestling habit are the ones who pay the dues as well. And, you know, I remembered what they did for me as a kid, and it was my turn to make sure, you know, my grandma died 2 years later, and I made sure her last 2 years of her life were the most comfortable 2 years she could have, you know, and took care of my mom, you know, and then, you know, when things got, you know, my mom's health got, worse, my sister helped take care of my mom, but you just gotta repay the people who help you know, and that's
Yeah.
what I tried to do, and thank God professional wrestling gave me that opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, the things that you said there, it really is important. There are so many people out there that you forget that really help you to achieve these dreams, especially, I mean, wrestling at the beginning. For anyone who hasn't been anyone listening who aren't wrestling fans, the indie circuit, you are not making money at the beginning. I mean, not even close. And so the fact that there are people around you supporting you, that's just so special. And you mentioned something else I kind of wanted to touch on. You mentioned, bullying, and you mentioned, having to do therapy for depression and all these things. Um, and so talk to me about how that shaped you, and I'm assuming maybe you still deal with that a little bit. How is it that you deal with mental health issues, or have learned to deal with those things?
Well, as I approach 51, be 51 in May. I'm just more comfortable in my skin now, but it took a while. You know,
Mhm.
you know, you're growing up and you're always in the hospital, and then you can't do anything without being winded. So kids make fun of you because you can't keep up, and then, you know, because you're not physically active, you put on a little bit of weight, and then you're depressed at everything that's going on. So that leads to depression eating, and then,
Mhm.
that leads to more bullying. So, and then there's also the issue of, just never knowing my dad and stuff like that, and it
Mhm.
piles up. Other kids can be cruel,
Yeah.
and they see something, they latch onto it until, you either fight back or, they get bored with you. But pro wrestling, I thank God for pro wrestling, because I was able to. Well, thankfully, I lived in a small town called Gloucester where a lot of this happened. When my grandparents moved to Atlantic City, brought me there. It was was a fresh beginning. You know, I was in new schools with new kids. I got a little bit of, you know, razzing because, you know, when you miss that much school, you get held back. So I was a little bit older than the kids in my class. So you get your, stones busted for that. But, I was able to make new friends and new opportunities and, you know, but, you still have the scar tissue, so to speak. But you just deal with it. And, in grade school, I had therapy. High school, I had therapy. Because, there's the moments when you realize I should be doing this or doing that, I should be graduating this year, but I couldn't graduate this year because I missed too much school because I was always in the hospital kind of stuff.
Mm.
And, thankfully my folks were supportive, they saw, how it affected me and just talk and have conversations and, you know, and they were awesome. I could go to my grandparents to talk about literally anything, and they would always give me honest answers, and it's just a special bond, as with my mom and my grandparents that like I said, I still try to carry their torch on to this day, and celebrate.
It's cool, to think, man, like, how awesome is it? I mean, I love your story because I could only imagine as someone, look, I'm 6'7" and I was a little heavier growing up as well. And but you know, and so everybody, at least in those times, 80s and 90s, just everybody was bullied for anything
Oh
that
yeah,
was different, right? But but how cool is it that you're the guy who was constantly in the hospital for asthma, couldn't do anything athletic, and you're performing in the WWF and you know what I mean? Like you are a legit professional wrestler, uh, living, made a living as a TV star in 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 ECW, which is like this just it's just an urban legend now of all the stuff that ECW has done
yeah.
and is funneled throughout the whole business, and also had multiple stints in the WWF, WWE. That is just, I mean, uh, that's actually a heartwarming and inspirational story.
I,
I mean,
I always tell people if they made a story of my life, they'd be like, "Oh, that's too corny. That's too weird." Just I debuted for ECW in my hometown. I debuted for WWE in my hometown. I had my WrestleMania moment in my hometown, and in front of my friends and family. But yeah, it was like I said when I said I wanted to be a professional wrestler. They looked at me like, I had, three heads. I may as well just say I wanted to be an astronaut, and just that time of just, the moments where I thought, you know, not being able to go out and play with the other kids, that time alone and sitting in my bedroom and just watching wrestling may have been a blessing in disguise. It's always good to look at something that may have been something detrimental to you and, look at it as a potential asset or a potential blessing in disguise. Like, you know, uh, I'm trying to leave my house and I can't find my car keys. They were just here, blah, blah, blah. And then I find my car keys. And then I go on about to perform the test that I need to do. And I pass a car accident, you
yeah,
know. Well, man, hey, maybe if I had found my car keys, I would have been in that car accident. Who knows?
right,
Maybe that time I could have been spent out playing with other kids would have took away from my time to discover and just watch wrestling and fall in love with it and make that my career when it grows up. You always got to look at something as something that's perceived as a setback can always be a blessing. And that's how I look at my time with, my asthma and,
mhm,
spending a lot of time alone and, you know,
mhm,
it, I, it's just telling a kid to go to a room used to be a punishment. To me, it was kind of a
yeah,
blessing where I just got to be alone and just I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't out on the streets, fighting or doing whatever. I just in my room watching I was watching professional wrestling, I was watching stand-up comedy, and I fell in love with rock and roll and Van Halen, so I was watching MTV too all day, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And in
Yeah,
the
but
80s,
you're a big Van Halen fan?
oh, absolutely. You know,
Yeah,
Eddie Van Halen's music got me through a lot of tough times, you know. To me, it was
yeah.
always about Eddie, you know, and that's another thing, you know, as I was growing up and bonding with wrestlers, you know, and following their careers, you know, MTV with, you know, doing like interviews and all that stuff. You kind of personality profiles, you kind of grow to love a, you know, a person you don't even know, but just through how they come through the screen. So you know, those, you know, those three, Eddie Van Halen, George Carlin, and professional wrestling got me through the toughest times of my life.
Wow, that's interesting, man.
Yeah.
I gotta say, similarly, I discovered. I know you're a little bit older than me. I'm 43, but sounds like Van Halen for you was what Metallica and Guns N' Roses was for me. You
Yeah.
know, they just opened me up to a whole different world of things and just kind of spoke to me about some of the stuff I was going through. I had my dad, but up until about 16, 17, you know, he had issues with demons, we'll say, and he recovered. You know, he recovered when I was 17 and he's never looked back, but it was tough times too. And it's interesting how music and wrestling, you know, the story of people who are involved in wrestling tends to be very similar in that, you know, Hulk Hogan was like the guy for me is like the pinnacle of training, saying your prayers, eating your vitamins, believing in yourself, all that stuff, you know. Watching that stuff, it just kind of gave me hope for life for some weird reason. And it sounds silly to people who don't know it, who don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so, tell me what. Let's move on to ECW. Do you have a moment, an ECW moment that sticks out to you as like your favorite moment?
Well, before I go on to that, to expand on your other point, to get into professional wrestling, you kind of have to be a misfit, you know.
Mm, yeah.
You know, just and that's what ECW was. We were the land of misfit toys, you know, the
Hmm.
wrestlers that nobody else wanted, and or in my case, nobody had discovered yet. You know, ECW
Hmm.
gave me my opportunity. You know,
Hmm.
but you have to be eccentric to want to do this. You kind of have to be unique
Right.
to want to do this. Why else will we put up with half the things we put up with? You know, between the
Yeah.
travel and the riots and the fights and, you know,
Hmm.
adversity at home because you're never there for the birthday parties, you're never there for the weddings. You know, it's amazing. Like I'm so battle tested that people laugh at my lack of reaction to certain things where you know, so two cars could just collide in front of me. And I'm just standing there like, okay, where everybody else is like running around like, oh my god. I've seen so many things and I've been through so many things that I'm not desensitized, but I'm just wired differently to
Yeah.
I watch, I react, I analyze, I absorb before I react to different things. You know,
Yeah.
where some people might fly off the handle and, you know, light the world on fire and, you know, burn relationships and, you know, whatever. I watch, I listen, I analyze, and then you know, but that's how wrestling. You got to be that way. You got in wrestling. You got to. Yeah, I know we're getting on to ECW, but it's just, you know, I think I fit in because we were all just we're all different, but we're all the same. You know, just
Yeah.
and we all had a common goal. It's just to give the best, you know, you know, give the best performance we could. And you know, you know, thank God Al Snow trained me because he taught me early on, you know, mouth closed, eyes open, ears open. And, you know, you go into a locker room and you just sit there, you know, you go into any locker room and you become a creature of habit. You know, you grab a chair and you sit in the same spot every show. And I was a back of the classroom type kid where I had to sit in the back of the classroom and just watch people. And just, you
Mhm.
know, if I go to a restaurant, I have to have my back against the wall and watch the rest of the restaurant. You know, I like to watch I like to observe. And that's why I did an ECW, and that's, kind of got what got me through, I blended in, I got along, I didn't screw with people because I didn't want people to screw with me back. And, you know, um, it led to, a lot of great relationships I still have to this day, a couple weeks ago, TNA was in town. I stopped by the building and we all took me, Dreamer, Rhino, Louis Dangerously, Lance Storm, we all got together and Little Guido, we took like a nice photo. This past weekend and for the Legends of Extreme show, us ECW guys, we all get together and take a group photo because we know we consider each other family, and we realize what we did was special. And it's just, it was, and I knew that, growing up, kind of see things in your life and you're like, I was meant to be in professional wrestling, because no matter what school I went to or what class I was in, I was always in the rowdiest class. Fourth grade, teachers would have to come across the hall and ask my teacher to tell us to pipe down. I was like, I went to work in the casinos. I'm working on the graveyard shift with a bunch of misfits, all we did was walk around all night and look for poker chips on the floor or see if somebody left a credit in a slot machine, in a wrestling locker room, you say you want wrestlers to come around, just, shake a pill bottle. In the casinos, you just rattle change and all the security guards run in like, So I look at my time, in grade school and working in casinos with a bunch of misfits. I was like, oh yeah, this is why I fit in ECW. It was just it was my destiny. It was my path, that some greater power, whether it's God or aliens, put me on to be with these crazy people and just deal with crazy things. I deal with crazy very well. And, because maybe I am crazy, but, and that's, why ECW was what it was. We were just crazy, but we were talented and we were able to connect with, the hardest of the hardest fans to please, which was, the ECW fans which were the descendants of, the same people who cheered for the Broad Street Bullies, or Buddy Ball, Buddy Ryan, those type fans, those were the fans, those were the people who were coming to ECW shows, and they work so hard during the week that, they just want to be entertained and come to a show. And as long as you put in the effort, they'll be behind you 1,000%. And if it looks like you're slacking or trying to cheat them, they'll let you know, because they, their time and money is an investment and they keep their receipts. So, and just and that's what's ECW. My favorite moment in ECW, all of them. I could pick, the night McFoley had me and Stevie come out and help him, leave ECW, go to WWE. I could say the night we came out as KISS. I could say the night we came out as BWO. I could say, we just had the 27th anniversary of 27 years ago, Barely Legal happened. I could say I was a part of the semi-main event of ECW's first ever pay-per-view. There's so many moments, and thank God for fans reminding me of things I forgot I did, because when you're in it, you're going on to the next thing where fans still watch something, they'll rewind it, they'll rewatch it. When you're in the business, you do the thing you just did, and then you're driving to the next thing you're about to do. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. I never made $1 million as a business, but I got paid royally in experience and friendships, and that have afforded me to continue to do stuff in the business. I could have made all my cash up front and burnt out and went away, but here I am, as a worker, able to still go out and do a show, do a convention, make connections with people, at these things and we're all like-minded folks. And that's why I think,
Mhm.
that's why I love about these things. You get together and I'm enjoying the fruits of my labor of everything I put my body, my mind and my body through.
Yeah.
And
It's
rest.
it's funny, you say that because yeah, I mean, just think about this. Like the whole reason I was out that weekend was because I was taking my two sons. I have a son who's he's a senior in high school, and then one is in fifth grade, and we're all, they're wrestling fans because I've been a wrestling fan, right? And so we decided for Christmas I got them WrestleMania 40 tickets, and I saw that they were doing the ECW reunion Legends of Hardcore show at the ECW arena, and I'm like, bucket list, go to the ECW arena. We're checking that off. And my kids had known of ECW. They knew the Dudleys. I did some because I own a wrestling ring and have done a bunch of stuff back in 2009 and 10, 11. I was doing some stuff with TNA. And so Bubba Ray was involved. So they've met him and RVD and stuff like that. So they're familiar, but they don't understand ECW.
Yeah.
And the coolest thing is being in that arena and the Sandman comes around, and the Sandman actually, my 17-year-old son is standing there. He's right in front of us. And I could tell that like he wanted to pour it into my son's mouth, but like he didn't know. Like it was like kind of like I don't know if he's old enough, and so he just hands him his beer and he goes, "Here you go, kid," and like takes off. And I just for me, and it's funny because we're Mormon, right? We don't drink, we don't do any of that. So we were both looking at ourselves like, what are we gonna do if the Sandman tries to pour beer in our mouths, right? And so it was just so funny because like for me seeing that. uh like the normal person would be like, that doesn't sound like anything special, right? But like for me, seeing that moment where the Sandman, we are in the ECW arena, Sandman's entrance, handing that, handing that to him, even though we don't drink, like it's just a special moment, And you guys, there were so many ECW special moments, and I think one of the most interesting moments, I was actually, just so you know, I was in the crowd in Sacramento when you wrestled JBL on
Oh,
SmackDown.
wow.
Yeah. And so I was there when that happened. So now you've had a couple of stints in the WWE. Was there one that you enjoyed more than the other?
I just enjoyed it all, just,
Hmm.
you know, uh, it's where I wanted to go. It's what I wanted to do. WWE was the bug that bit me as a kid when it was WWF.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
all I watched, is all I knew. Of course, did I watch NWA? Absolutely. Did I enjoy NWA? Absolutely. The Crockett's. I loved the AWA. I went to AWA shows when they came to Atlantic City. I loved it all, but ultimately, I went to be in the WWF.
Sure.
I love ECW. I still love ECW. Uh, the ECW is the reason why anybody knows who I am. Ultimately, you want to go to the WWF, and I'm unapologetic a WWE guy because that's the bug that bit me and all my memories. And Philly was always a huge WWE town. Whether it was doing the TVs in the '70s on 48th and Market Street. Every weekend they'll be wrestling at the Spectrum where you can go Saturday night and then you can watch the replay Sunday afternoon on Prism, the local
Hmm.
cable channel. And a lot of the wrestlers lived in the area too, so you always hear stories of running into Bulldog Bob Bauer or Brown, whoever was going by at the time. WWE's where you wanted to be, and when I got there, I was just the kid in the candy store, just
Hmm.
happy that not astonished, but happy I made it. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, excited that I made it. Because now I can pay back my family, and B, do the thing I always thought I could do was perform on the greatest scale you could possibly perform. And WWE gave me all those opportunities. To the point where they gave, even this past weekend, I got to work for them, giving tours to their VIP fans of the ECW arena. So,
Mm.
they trusted me with that, responsibility. And whether it's, my first run from 98 to 2000, or when I went back in 2005, I came back in 2014-ish to host ECW Unreleased Volume 3 with Steve Richards and Joey Styles. And then, I keep popping up in different little things on, whether Edge and Christian, bringing me up on their network show, or you see BWO shirts in the crowd. But, this past weekend, I got to give a tour of the ECW arena to their VIP fans, the folks that are always, in the front row at the pay-per-views. They entrusted me to do that, and it worked out very well. So any moment I get a chance to work with the WWE is my favorite, because to me they're the wrestling promotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that 2005 run was interesting because it came off of the heels of ECW One Night Stand and kind of a revamp of that. And then, of course, I think I even told you when I met you, I was like, I really wanted to talk to you about the JBL thing, particularly because I was there when you actually wrestled him.
Yeah.
And he actually, I found it. I was a dirt sheet guy. I read about everything that happened. I saw ECW One Night Stand live, so I saw him take his liberties on you during that brawl. And so tell me really more along the lines how that came about, because he put you over in the match, right? And so tell me how that came about, and kind of how your guys' relationship after that kind of was and is.
I mean, I was just talking to him this morning, so it's just.
Oh, were you really?
Yeah. We texted all weekend. I'm on the text chain with him and Gerald Briscoe, and we just break Gerald Briscoe's balls. But no, it was just, like I said, I've dealt with bullying my whole life, and just being different. And when I went up there 98 to 2000, I felt that I had been bullied. And when I left WWE, or when I was released in 2000, I said I enjoyed my time in WWE. I said JBL was a bully,
Mm-hmm.
and that was that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, between 2000 and 2005, me saying JBL was a bully, I'm sure it grew legs. You ever play that game Telephone, or
Oh yeah,
or Grapevine, where one person tells another person one thing, and by the time it gets to the person you're talking about, it's totally something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a case of that, where I said, hey, I think if it was just him here, I think if it was him hearing me just say, hey, he was a bully, it would have just probably been like, oh, well, whatever. But I think by the time it got to him through other people's mouths and creative embellishments, that it became something bigger. So, the first time we see each other's at One Night Stand, and, he took issue with me calling him a bully, and we had our deal. And then after that, the brawl happened. Johnny Ace pulled me aside and asked me. I gave him the cliff notes right there in the gorilla position, and he apologized. And I go home, and my face is all bruised up, and I saw my mom's reaction to how I looked, and that lit another fire under my ass. And I started writing blogs and talking about it, and I was venting about it. And eventually I get a call from Dreamer, and it says, hey, we want to bring you in. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but they were thinking about bringing back the BWO for a short amount of time, just to help as a vehicle for Steve Richards to go from the show Velocity to SmackDown. SmackDown's colors are blue and white. And Nova, who was in the office at the time in talent relations, was pitching the idea. So I think this expedited, this brawl expedited. But Dreamer calls and says, "Hey, we want to bring you in, BWO." Initially says this has nothing to do with JBL, and I get to the building in Sacramento, and they're like, "Well, you're wrestling Bradshaw tonight. You're wrestling JBL tonight." I'm like, "Oh, come on, man!" And so I'm standing there, And JBL comes up to me and says, "You want to talk?" I was like, "Absolutely." So we're in Sacramento, and we find a room, we find a conference room, and we go in there and go in there and talk like two men. And he said we could either fight or we could make money. I was like, "Bro, I didn't say bro. I said, John, I never wanted to fight in the first place. I was a fan of his, before all this stuff happened, watching, from a distance. Because he reminded me of a Stan Hansen type, and I loved that. And I laid out everything he did, and he claims he didn't remember, which the Attitude Era was an insane time. You know, I could see where somebody could go crazy in the Attitude Era, or just be on edge, and but ultimately at the end of the day, the most important thing is he apologized, and we shook hands, and we turned something that was a shoot and made it into a work. And we went into the ring, and we took a real life. The best things in pro wrestling is when you take real life issues and turn them into a work. And we were able to do that, and to the point where people thought the whole thing was a work at first. They're like, "Oh, that was it." I was like, "No, it was a shoot," but we were able to go, put our differences aside and become friends and make money with it, to the point where, a couple years after that, when the Royal Rumble came into Philly, he pitched me for being a surprise in the Rumble in Philly, because I had just filmed. I had just done the ECW DVD that was coming out, and what better avenue to promote, a DVD, I did, and in the Rumble, it would be the Rumble in Philly. So, and that's the thing, as we see all these issues between Punk and like Jack Perry and stuff like that, and I'm like sitting here going, "Look, I went through something way worse." And I was able to talk and put things aside, just like I think Punk wanted to work things out, and they didn't work out. But me and John were able to work through our issues and put things aside, and we're friends to this day. And people could say whatever they want, but I'm comfortable where I in my life now, and me and John talk a couple times a week. So,
Man, well, that's awesome to hear. You know what I mean? That you were able to put that aside, especially when there's all this. You brought up that CM Punk stuff, and it just sounds like. I mean, I saw the video or whatever that they put out, and I was just like, I saw worse than that in a high school locker room. You know what I mean? And guys shook hands afterwards. I can't believe that got so blown up. You know what I mean? And just, I don't, maybe just because of who we are and how we work, we're just wired differently than most people. But I just look at that, I'm like, like what I think CM Punk says, like, I just choked him a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, that's all he did. He just put him in a quick chokehold.
Yeah.
I was
a little shove, a little front face lock, and that was it.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make it work. They wanted him to go to Atlanta. He flew to Atlanta to have a meeting to hash things out, and they no-showed the meeting. And it's just like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just speculating on things I've heard. So I hate when people do that to me. So but I've been through something, and we went through something, and we came through on the other side as friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. Well, listen, we're about out of time. I appreciate you giving me the hour. Let me just ask you. Yeah, let me ask you one more question before we wrap up, and that is, someday down the road, you are going to pass away, and when you do, there's going to be a funeral, and someone's going to give you a eulogy. What do you hope someone says? The one thing someone says about you in your eulogy?
That's not for me to decide. It's just the only thing I control is how I treat people, and hopefully I made a positive impact on their life. I know in my life I haven't been perfect. I know there's times where I was hard to deal with, but that was just me dealing with issues, really related to having a rough go as a kid, and between asthma, depression, bullying, and stuff like that. Where I had to, go to therapy and deal with, stuff like that. But, growing up and just learning how to manifest my depression and turn it around and try to turn it into something positive and try to help others and lending somebody else an ear or a shoulder when they're going through something, the best I can. I'm not
Mhm.
perfect. I don't wear a lab coat. I don't have a PhD, but I've been through some stuff. I've been through some stuff. So when my day comes, hopefully it's just a big celebration, just friends getting together and just the way I want it, my party to be here in Philly with Meanie. I just wanted people to get together, have a good time and reminisce. So when my time comes and, God knows when that's going to be, but I just want people to gather in a room and just reminisce and, just talk about the good times.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, okay, let's where can people find you?
If you would like to follow me on all forms of social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Blue Meanie BWO. If you would like to support the Blue Meanie, go to pressingtees.com/Blue Meanie. I also have a podcast, Minded a Meanie, which drops
Mm.
every Monday morning at 6 a.m. wherever you get your favorite podcast. And me and my co-host Adam Bernard talk about everything from music, movies, sports, wrestling, and tons of useless knowledge. And that's our latest episode debuted just today. So that's where I'm going. I'm just right now. I'm physically and mentally just catching up from WrestleMania week. My body's a little tired and I'm a little bit sick, but you know, uh, I'm just trying to do the best I can to be the best me every day. Even when life tries to say otherwise.
Yeah, it's all we can do, man. And I got to tell you, as someone who has been involved in wrestling and as someone who is a fan, thank you for everything that you have contributed.
Mm. Thank you.
You are an incredibly creative person, and it carries through in everything that you do. And it's just so impressive to finally meet you. I've known of you for a long time, and to meet you in person and then finally have you on my podcast is really special for me. So I appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Yeah, awesome. So for those of you who've listened, don't forget to subscribe. I'm sure we'll have more wrestlers on down the pipe, and all sorts of different things. I have a lot of different ideas of people who are coming. We'll see who actually agrees and then actually shows up. So subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.